and welcome to a new episode of Healing Our Communities. I'm your host, Heather McDaniel, Vice President of the West Virginia Drug Intervention Institute. And today I have a very special guest with us. Everyone meet Joanna Vance. She is the Program Coordinator for West Virginia Economic Justice for the American Friends Service Committee. Welcome, Joanna, to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to talk about the work you do, your role at AFSC, and just who you are and your story. So let's get started and let the viewers get to know just a little bit more about you personally. Can you share a little bit just about you outside of work? Like, not the work Joanna, but just a little bit about who Joanna is.
Okay, so I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. I have a husband. I help coach Little League baseball and softball. I'm not really a PTO mom, but I do help at schools as much as I can, and doing a lot of stuff in the communities also.
Yeah, I know you're super involved everywhere. It seems like not just where you live, but like statewide and even nationally. And I know that you're a program coordinator working for AFSC on a whole lot of things. Can you tell us a little bit about the American Friends Service Committee, who they are, and like the general work, like an overview of the organization?
Yeah, so the American Friends Service Committee is actually like an international, global Nobel Peace Winning Prize organization. It's actually a Quaker organization, so it is like rooted in faith-based, a lot of like Christianity and things like that, like have a lot of strong roots that come from Quakerism. But basically, like altogether, the American Friends Service Committee is about like just economies and having like peace and not war, and making sure that people have housing and food and, you know, all of like the basic human rights things that, you know, people should have.
Everyone should have.
Yeah. And we have programs like internationally. We have programs like all up and down North America. I think in the United States we have like 25 programs. We have 2 specifically here in West Virginia, which is the program I work for, which is the West Virginia Economic Justice Program. And then we have a program called ACE. It's the Appalachian Center for Equality, and that is actually like a youth program here in West Virginia.
Oh, that's great. I didn't realize you guys were so involved with youth as well. So to specifically talk a little bit about what you do, and I know you said that you are part of the Economic Justice Program. Can you talk a little bit about your specific role and what your work entails there, which I know, again, is really a lot of things, but share some things about your specific role there.
Yeah, so I just stepped into the program coordinator position this past May, I believe it was. Before that, I was actually a fellow, and I had had that role for 2 years before stepping into the program coordinator position. And it's a lot of like strategic planning and implementation about like, you know, building and growing and organizing on like a local and a state level here in West Virginia. And then it's trainings and education. And then, you know, we do a lot of like legislative priority stuff as well.
Yeah, I know you're super involved at the legislature, and we are going to talk about that in just a little bit. Can you talk about some of the opportunities that you've been given through this role that maybe you wouldn't have had if it wasn't for your position with AFSC?
Oh, I've got to do some amazing things working with the American Friends Service Committee. I've got to go to the White House. I have got to work on some like big federal pieces of legislation. Oh my gosh, there's so much. I had, this past fall, there was actually some reporters from Berlin, I think, maybe, that's not right, but it was like the New York Times of like a different nation, and it's in Dutch. I'll have to send it to you.
Yeah,
but, like,
for sure.
They came and they like went around with me for a couple of days to like events, and I took them like, you know, in super rural areas of West Virginia, and then in like you know, into the city and stuff, and they like wrote a huge article that I don't even actually know what a lot of it says because it's not translated into English. It's just all in Dutch, and I haven't went through, but that was very cool. So many things. I have the opportunity to work with a multitude of different organizations, like not just here in West Virginia, but like across the East Coast and then across the nation in general. Like there's so many opportunities.
I was glad you mentioned the White House because that was one that kind of stuck in my head that you got to do. Can you talk a little bit about what you were invited there for and the event that was going on just this past year?
Yeah, so I was invited to the White House for International Overdose Awareness Day. They had maybe 20 sets of families come that had experienced overdose loss over the years. And actually, I lost my father from a fatal overdose when I was 15, and that was in 2004. But my dad was actually like the oldest of the group that he had died. You know, that was 19 years ago that he died. So my dad was like, and then they had people that had just died in recent years, you know, a lot of young kids, you know, from like fentanyl-laced pills and stuff. But they brought these families there, and of course they had like a press conference and stuff. It's the White House.
Yeah.
But we got to, you know, we got to meet with Dr. Gupta. We got to meet with the second gentleman. We got to meet with the National Office of Drug Control Policy and just share some of our story and about our loved ones, and then about like the work that each of us are doing in our respective areas, and you know, just talk about like some solutions of what we could be doing together moving forward to help address, you know, this overdose crisis that we have.
Yeah, and I followed your post on social media while you were there, and it looked like an amazing event to be a part of. And so you did just kind of share a little bit about your story, you know, and unfortunately losing your dad to a fatal overdose. Can you talk a little bit about your journey to where you are now, kind of how you got to where you are in this amazing role with, you get to do such amazing work in the community?
Yeah, I grew up with parents who used drugs in Boone County, West Virginia, super rural. Like I said, I lost my dad to a fatal overdose on Thanksgiving Day when I was 15. And then, you know, generational curses are hard to break.
Absolutely.
So I actually, you know, I suffered through my own chaotic drug use, or people call it addiction. There's so many different terms for it now, for the better part of 10 years. And then in 2016 is when I actually came into recovery. And one of my very best friends overdosed and died the day before Christmas Eve in 2017. And I had already been in recovery for like a year and a half at that point. And I remember sitting at his funeral, and all I could think about was like our times in my active use when we were sitting, specifically we were sitting like in my apartment floor. And of course we were using drugs at that time, but we were talking about recovery. But we didn't know it was recovery at that time, right? We were like, had anybody ever lived the lives that we had, gone through the things that we had, and like actually came out on the other side and had their family, had a home, had a life, like not suffering from addiction. And we didn't know anybody. We didn't know anybody from Boone County, West Virginia, like maybe anybody at all. And it was at my friend's funeral in 2017 that like I decided that if nobody's gonna know anybody that is in recovery, that they're going to know me, because it's important. If people don't know that it's possible,
right,
then they don't strive to try to find that. And you know, that was in 2017, and it's just been, I see so many people in recovery now,
yeah,
from Boone County, from Southern West Virginia, from across the nation. And like that Recover Out Loud advocacy movement that started was so needed, because like I know anonymity and in the rooms and stuff, like people need to not be afraid to talk about it. So yeah, that started my advocacy journey. And then in 2018, I did my first ever like recovery event. It was in Beckley, West Virginia, and people thought that I was crazy because I wanted to bring all of the pathways of recovery together for one event.
Well, yep.
And they were like, you can't do that. People aren't going to come. And actually they did, and it was very successful. And then, you know, the rest is
history.
Yeah, the rest is history. Would organize events, go to the Capitol, do
Yeah.
all of the things.
And
then
you're
like,
everywhere now. I feel like you're always somewhere different. Like,
but like to actually get my specific job that I have with the American Friends Service Committee, like I worked for free for a long time. You know, I have 3
Yeah.
kids. Like I didn't want to like work and then all my paycheck go to daycare. So when they all finally went to school together, the first year was actually 2021 during the pandemic. So they didn't even go to school like that first year. It was like all virtual and stuff. But I had been doing this work, like doing legislative stuff, showing up at the Capitol, like testifying in committee. I was a part of this coalition. And, you know, the executive director at the time of American Friends Service Committee asked me, he was like, Joanna, who do you work for? Like, I see you doing all this stuff. I'm like, I don't work for anybody. And I mean, basically, they were like, all right, come and do exactly what you're doing, but do it for us. And it's life-changing. I never even knew that, like, there were organizer positions. Like, that's not, they don't come to school and tell you on career day. But yeah, and it's just, I've got to do so much and to see so much. And I know I started off like with a substance use recovery background, but now in economic justice, like I see how all of it is connected, right? With like the social determinants of health, with ACEs, with like all of the systemic things that are happening. And it's all encompassing. And like I think that once people start to realize that it's actually like it's not just about
just one
substance
thing,
use.
right.
Like it's about housing, it's about food, it's about healthcare, it's all of these things. And it took me, I got a year in my role, I guess, to like put it all together. And then now, like I just see how it all is intertwined and connected. And I like to like, teach people that. And I think a lot of people know that, but like until you actually lay it down and talk about it, they're like, but it makes sense as soon as you talk about it.
If you don't have a job or food to eat or all of these things that are basic needs that some people don't have, and we expect them to function as normal adults without having a place to live or clothes or a coat or, you know, things that we may not think twice about, that we take for granted. So what do you think so far, because I know you're just going to continue to do great things, what do you think so far has been one of your biggest accomplishments in this role that you're in now?
You know, we've had some successes at the legislature, of course, like pushing good legislation, passing good legislation, and stopping some bad legislation. I really enjoy, like, our criminal law reform coalition is amazing. It's like a multitude of organizations all across the state working on criminal law reform, but it's really led by people with lived experience. It's led by people in recovery. It's led by formerly incarcerated people. Like, we are at the table making the decisions on how we want to move forward and not just like being tokenized for when somebody needs our story, right? But one of my favorite things that I did like this year specifically was we had our criminal law reform conference, but we actually added a youth track to that. So we had 80 adults and then we had 20 youth that came. And the cool thing is like all of the youth that came was actually kids of like the adults that came, or kids with lived experience, because they had parents who were there who were formerly incarcerated, people in recovery, and like we're really moving towards like building a youth-led advocacy movement.
Which is so needed.
And that was the first step, and it was great to watch these kids. They made like their own policy pitches on the school to prison pipeline and like how they would address it or how they would fix it, and I'm very excited. There's a lot of youth things getting ready to happen in West Virginia, and I think the important thing that people need to realize is that like adults don't need to be leading that.
No, it should be their peers. That's who should be, you know.
It needs to be the kids, but that's probably one of my like this year specifically, that's one of like my definite highlights.
It sounded like it was a great weekend when we got to kind of talk about it afterwards. It sounded like you guys had an amazing time. So we are going to take a short break, and then we'll be back to learn more about Joanna and the work she's doing, and specifically right down the street at the legislature.
At the WVDII, we believe that every home with an opioid should have a life-saving naloxone kit on hand. For your free kit and online training, visit WVDII.org.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Healing Our Communities. We're still talking with Joanna Vance, who is Program Coordinator for the American Friends Service Committee. So Joanna, we talked a little bit about your role and what you've done and kind of how you've gotten to where you're at. But continuing on with that, and I always like to ask people this because everyone's answers are so interesting. What has surprised you the most about your work so far?
Oh gosh. Probably like just the work in general.
Yeah.
Like I never imagined to be like working at the legislature or doing policy work or even like doing strategic planning for the state to like help solve like all of the problems with, you know, like substance use and mental health. You know, the first time I ever even voted was in 2020. Like I didn't grow up with people who like really were actively engaged that way. So yeah, just working at the legislature and policy, and I never ever imagined that I would be considered a policy expert, and now all the time I have people call me or email me to help like amend a bill or write a bill or pass something, and it just blows my mind.
I'm sure it's been so interesting, that change to not have voted until 2020 to literally living at the Capitol during the session every year, which is pretty much where everyone can find you at that time of the year. What has disappointed you the most in this role?
I think the fact that like the West Virginia people don't really know what's happening in the legislature, right? Like they see the headlines and they see the news, like they see what the leadership at the legislature wants them to see, right? But like when it comes to how money is being spent, like the West Virginia budget, like how ARPA funds, like all of the money that came down from COVID, like that money, I mean, everybody in West Virginia knows, like we are struggling in so many different ways, right? And if like the West Virginia people would just pay attention to the budget, like we have more than enough money in West Virginia to fix all of our problems. But like it's the West Virginia legislature that is in charge, and not even the entirety of the legislature. Like of course they have to like vote to pass it. That's like the only thing they have to do. But like it's only like the finance committees, right, that like do have the final say so. And you know, I had to learn about policy, like follow the money. Right. Because that's exactly where it's going to be at. And like it's so disappointing that like people want to complain about what's happening and what's going on, but like to actually pay attention to how we could change it and fix it, like the money's there. We can solve all of the problems in West Virginia. It's just getting our legislature to put the money where it needs to go.
And you and I have talked before that like a lot of people in West Virginia don't even realize the Capitol building is open to the public. So people are not even informed that they can go there.
Oh, I didn't
during
know.
session. People don't know. And I think especially if you didn't grow up in this area, you really don't have any clue that it's a public building that people can go
I
into.
had no idea. And you know, I take people, like I give them tours, I take them to meet legislatures, I do all of that stuff during session time also. But every single year I meet new people that did not know that it is an open public building. Mm-hmm. Like you do not have to have an appointment to go in that building. Like you do not have to have like a specific reason to be there. Like it is the people's building, and it just blows my mind. Yeah. Like you can just go in and stop and talk to people, whatever.
Right. And so we talked a little bit about, you've been able to help pass some good legislation or stop some bad legislation, and we talked earlier about kind of your accomplishments with AFSC. So I know you are at the legislature a lot during session and other times throughout the year. Can you talk a little bit about some of those accomplishments from working with members of the legislature and some of the things you've been able to help do, and just what those accomplishments are and what that journey has been like getting involved with the policymakers?
Oh yeah, there's been, I'm not gonna lie, it's a lot of defense. Like, we play a lot of defense at the Capitol, like, because there's just so much stigma and misinformation about, like, substance use and about poverty and about all of the things. But we have had, so there's a lot of defense played, always. Education, always, always, always educating and sharing stories of people and like real people, not just like the data that legislatures see, right? But we've had some successful legislation that's passed in recent years, and it blows a lot of people's minds, especially like people not from West Virginia that know the work that I do. They're like, how are you so successful in passing legislation, Joanna, with like this super majority that you have? And like, I don't think our legislature is not like the Florida legislature or the Texas legislature. Like, of course we have our own problems and stuff, but the majority of the legislatures, like, they want to find solutions. They want help. They want to, represent the people and do well. So like we passed the fentanyl test strip bill. Last year we passed the CPS expungement bill, which was great. We've already had like our first person has had their CPS record expunged. We passed the CAPIAS bill last year. We stopped a lot of bad stuff. And this is like my this is my third year like full time going into the legislature. So I did a lot of like offensive work during the off session this year, like going to interims and talking to the legislatures and stuff about like policies and good bills and stuff that we could implement now. So like I already have all of my bills are sponsored for the upcoming session, right? We have our clean slate bill, which is automatic expungement for non-convictions. We have expanding our fentanyl test strip bill to include like xylazine test strips or whatever other like test strips might need to come out. And then, of course, thanks to the West Virginia Drug Intervention Institute and Dr. Akery at UC, we have a bill sponsored to make naloxone mandatory in all schools in West Virginia. And I'm really excited about that because that legislation was actually passed in 2017 saying that like schools could have naloxone, but none of it didn't really start getting implemented until like 2019. And like there's a bunch of schools that are like opting out or don't know. And like with this piece of legislation, like it will not only like have naloxone in schools, but then it'll have the information to connect them to the institute and to connect the schools to Dr. Akery to be able to like actually get the naloxone in the schools and the one box and like training people because of the one box. And it's just great because in the policy realm now, like I try to stay away from finance. Like any of my legislation is just like rewording policy, striking, inserting stuff. I don't ever ask for like a fiscal note or anything like that because it's very difficult to get legislation passed that has some kind of fiscal note attached to it. So yeah, we just make a lot of changes in code, and it does, like, I really thought from the beginning, I was like, this isn't much. Like, it's not gonna do hardly anything, but like, just those little changes in legislation, in the wording and the language, like, does so much on the ground. Like, how many fentanyl test strips have we given out since that bill was passed?
Yeah, a lot.
Right, so many.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, we've already seen people getting their records expunged, getting their CPS stuff expunged. And it's been really good working with the legislatures, right? Like, because of course, I've shared my personal story with them about like being in recovery and losing loved ones and how I grew up and stuff. So like, we've really built relationships.
Which is what it's all about.
Oh,
for this.
yes.
Yeah.
And like, if anybody is wanting to talk to legislatures or do anything like it is all about relationship building, because nobody wants to only be talked to when they need something.
Right.
Like,
Right.
so I do. Like, I'll talk to the legislatures, ask them like, you know, how their holiday was, or like how their day is, or like we'll joke and all kinds of stuff. And the staff too.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of really great people at the Capitol, and it's just getting the right ideas in front of the right people, and then like knowing how to navigate that to actually get it passed, because we only have a part-time legislature, like
Right.
60 days.
That's it.
Is,
And they have a jam-packed schedule in that
yes,
60 days. Yeah.
we are busy.
Yes, I know that. I'll ask anything of you during that time. So, any events or activities coming up that you'd like to share with our viewers? Anything you're excited about next year? Any events that you can think of that people need to be watching for? Announcements or anything coming up that you think is important for people to be aware of?
Just off the top of my head, I do know that February the 5th is actually Recovery and Reentry Advocacy Day. For many years previously, it's been just Recovery Day, and we've had a different Reentry Day, and we're actually like all partnering together this year. And yeah, so there's going to be registration, sponsorships, information coming out about that at like the beginning of the new year. We're excited to have everybody at the Capitol, like of course setting up at tables and stuff. But like one part that we're adding this year, and it's something that we do at AFSC like for all of our events, but it's a new piece for Advocacy Day specifically, is like we're going to have several different teams that are going to take people around and like tour them around the Capitol and introduce them to legislatures and like actually putting like advocacy in action on Advocacy Day, and not just like sitting at a table waiting for somebody, legislatures who probably aren't going to come and like hear you talk about your program. Like, so much better to go and search them out. Go talk, stop them in the hallway. Like, go to their office.
That'll be a great change, I think, and a great way for people to get in front of them in a way that they maybe wouldn't have, and start building those relationships, which we talked about is so important. We are going to wrap things up here today. Joanna, thank you so much for coming on. You've shared so many great things with our viewers today. We always love having you around, and we'll see everyone next month.